The morning sun filtered through the dusty blinds of Joe's Highway Diner, casting golden streaks across the checkered floor. The clatter of utensils, the low hum of chatter, and the hiss of eggs frying on the griddle created a familiar rhythm. A kind of background song that never changed. Emily Carter moved through it all like she belonged to the silence between sounds. Her black apron was tied neatly over her faded jeans and plain t-shirt, her notepad tucked into the side pocket like a sidearm. Her eyes stayed down. Her voice remained soft. She had the kind of presence that people overlooked, and that's exactly how she liked it. No one in the diner really knew Emily. She'd been working there for just over a year, but in that time, most of the regulars had learned very little about her. She didn't talk about herself. She never mentioned her past. If you asked, she just smiled politely and changed the subject. Rumors floated that she was running from someone, that she was some kind of ex-cop, or that she'd lost everything and washed up in their small town like driftwood. But no one knew the truth. Not even Joe, the diner's grumpy but well-meaning owner. To most customers, she was just the waitress. The one who refilled coffee without being asked. The one who moved like a soldier and never lost her patience, even when people didn't deserve it. That morning, 3 men in business suits strolled in, loud and entitled. They were passing through town and clearly unimpressed by the diner's old booths and laminated menus. Emily greeted them with her usual polite nod and led them to a table near the window. "Coffee?" she asked, already pouring. "Sure, sweetheart," one of the men said, smirking. His eyes drifted to the inside of her wrist as she set the cups down. "What's that? A little toy tank?" He chuckled, pointing at her tattoo. Emily paused only for a second, then continued pouring without reacting. The second man leaned in. "What's it supposed to be? Army Barbie's badge of honor?" Laughter erupted from the table. It wasn't the first time someone had mocked her ink. Usually, she let it roll off her. But today, something about it felt heavier. She gave a brief smile, said nothing, and walked away. A man sitting at the far end of the diner caught the whole thing. He hadn't touched his pancakes. He sat with a straight back, gray hair buzzed short, sunglasses resting on the table beside him. He wore a faded green jacket with a patch stitched onto the shoulder, the unmistakable symbol of a Marine division. His name was James Hawkins, but everyone who ever served with him called him Hawk. As Emily walked past him to grab another pot of coffee, Hawk's eyes drifted to her wrist. The tank tattoo wasn't just any tank. It was detailed, precise. He'd seen that image before. His breath hitched. There was no mistaking it. That wasn't a novelty tattoo. That was Unit ink. He watched her as she moved, noting the subtle military posture, the way she scanned the room every few seconds, the tension in her shoulders. Something wasn't right. Or maybe something was too right, too familiar. He raised his hand as she approached. "Need a refill?" she asked. He nodded, then quietly asked, "That ink? Iron Talon?" Emily froze for just a moment. Her eyes flicked up to meet his, and something behind them shifted, a wall cracking. "Yes," she said simply. FOB Red Echo, 2012. Jaw clenched. The coffee pot trembled slightly in her hand as she poured into his cup. "You served with Iron Talon?" he asked again, his voice quieter now. Almost reverent. She gave the slightest nod, barely perceptible. Then Hawk did something that hadn't happened to her in a long, long time. He stood up. And saluted her. Right there, in the middle of the diner. Emily blinked, stunned. And for the first time in over a year, someone saw her. The laughter from the businessmen had faded, but its sting still clung to Emily's skin like oil after a fire. She stood behind the counter, hands trembling slightly as she wiped down a perfectly clean coffee mug. Her back was straight, her face calm, The same look she'd worn through artillery barrages and night patrols. But inside, memories stirred. Like sleeping giants, the tattoo they had mocked was more than ink. It was pain. It was survival. It was the last thing she'd let fade. Iron Talon, a name once whispered with pride and dread, was a forward-operating combat support unit deployed to some of the harshest zones in Kandahar. They weren't glamorous like special forces. They weren't the ones on magazine covers. But when vehicles got blown apart and lives hung by a thread, Iron Talon showed up with grease-stained hands, weapons slung over their shoulders, and a stubborn refusal to die. Emily was the only woman in her mobile repair platoon, a specialist in battlefield mechanics. She could rebuild a Humvee axle in a sandstorm and weld armor plate with her eyes half closed. But her real strength had always been her instinct. She sensed danger like an animal, something that had saved lives more than once. And that instinct had screamed at her the day the ambush hit. Their convoy had been moving along a narrow pass in Wardak province, returning from an outpost that had come under attack. Emily's team was in the middle vehicle, a lightly armored transport that rattled like a soda can. The IED struck first, then came the machine gun fire. The radio screamed, "Fall back! All units retreat." But Emily could hear the cries. Through the cum, two of her men trapped inside a smoking MRAP, pinned and bleeding. She ignored protocol, leapt out with tools and rifle in hand, and did what no one else would. She braced the frame with a wrench, cut through a jammed door with a blowtorch, and pulled both soldiers out before the fire swallowed the vehicle whole. They lived, but her career died that day. She disobeyed direct orders in combat. Chain of command. Doesn't like cowboys, especially not female mechanics from backwater towns. The investigation dragged for months. She was stripped of rank, labeled insubordinate, and handed a dishonorable discharge that felt like a bullet to the chest. No hearing. No honor ceremony. No flag. Just a box of personal items and silence. She'd returned to civilian life, a ghost of herself. Her father had already passed. Her mother was battling early-onset dementia. Her younger brother had fallen into trouble. Fights, drinking, arrests. She had no time to appeal, no energy to fight. Survival took priority. So she buried the soldier in her and found work where no one asked questions. That tattoo, the small, detailed M1A2 Abrams with the tail number of their lead vehicle, was all that remained of who she had been. She placed it where she could see it every day. A reminder of why she did what she did. A reminder of who she lost. And now, here was this man, this older Marine, clearly broken in his own way, looking at her like she wasn't a waitress, but a comrade. "You were Red Echo?" he asked again, still standing. "Yes," she said, her voice flat. "Iron Talon," he repeated softly. "My nephew died in that unit." Emily's hands dropped to her sides. Her throat tightened. "Reese?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded slowly. "Sergeant Daniel Reese." Emily sat down at the booth across from him without thinking. "I was with him when he fell," she said. Their eyes locked, two strangers bound by blood, fire, and silence. In that moment, the tattoo wasn't just a mark on skin. It was a bridge between two souls who never got to say goodbye. The diner buzzed around them. Waitresses moving between booths, forks clinking on plates, a baby crying somewhere near the door. But for Emily and Hawk, time had stilled. The air between them carried the weight of years, of battles fought far from home, and of names etched deep into memory. James Hawkins hadn't expected anything when he entered the diner that morning. Just breakfast and coffee, maybe a moment of silence to remember his nephew on what would have been Daniel Reese's 35th birthday. But the second he spotted that tank tattoo, Iron Talon's unofficial emblem, everything inside him locked up. He hadn't seen it in years. That ink was rare, worn only by those who survived the worst of it. Soldiers who didn't just fight, but bled and built and broke for one another. Soldiers like his nephew. He sat back down slowly, never breaking eye contact with Emily. "You knew Daniel?" he asked, voice tight. Emily nodded, the weight of it making her shoulders curl inward. "He was the best of us," she said. "Fast thinker, always calm, even under fire." He carried extra duct tape and Sour Patch Kids in his kit bag. Side both could fix anything. Hawk smiled despite the heaviness in his chest. "Sounds like him." "He saved my life," she continued, "during the ambush. When I ran toward the MRAP to pull out Perez and Hutchins, I got hit in the leg by shrapnel. I was bleeding out, couldn't move. Daniel covered me with his body, dragged me behind the supply crate, and patched me up using half a roll of that same tape." Her voice cracked slightly. "He didn't leave my side. Not until the mortar hit." Hawk bowed his head. "They told us it was instant." Emily nodded slowly. "It was. I carried him back." He sat still, blinking back the sting in his eyes. For over a decade, Hawk had only known fragments of that day. The Army's version. A redacted report. A flag folded in silence. Now, in this dusty little diner, the truth had finally come home, carried not by a general, but by a waitress with haunted eyes and a soldier's spine. "I didn't know," Hawk said softly. "I didn't know anyone made it out. They kept everything so clinical. They wanted it buried," Emily replied, bitterness creeping into her tone. "When I refused to retreat, Command called it a violation of the chain of command. No one cared that I saved 2 lives. No one wanted the headlines that a female specialist disobeyed orders in the field, even if it was for the right reasons." "And they gave you a dishonorable discharge?" Hawk asked, incredulous. She nodded. 3 months after I got back. No ceremony, no closure. Just shame. There was silence for a long beat. Then Hawk leaned in. "That ends now." Emily looked up sharply. "What?" "You don't deserve to be forgotten," he said. "You didn't disgrace the uniform. You honored it in the most real way possible. You saved lives. You carried my nephew back. I won't let your story die in this diner." She stared at him, unsure whether to believe it, unsure if she even wanted to hope again. "You don't even know me," she said quietly. Hawk tapped his chest. "I know Iron Talon, and I know the kind of person Daniel trusted with his life. That's enough." Just then, the same businessman from earlier called out, laughing loudly. "Hey, Sergeant Jane, table's dirty." Emily stiffened, but Hawk stood. He turned toward them, calm but steely. "Gentlemen," he said, loud enough for the whole diner to hear, "you're speaking to a decorated veteran. One who bled for your right to make dumb jokes over pancakes. So unless you're ready to put on boots and carry a rifle through hell, I suggest you eat quietly and respectfully." The diner fell silent. The men shrank back, and Emily Carter, for the first time in a very long time, stood a little taller. Asterisk after the confrontation, the diner returned to its hum, but it wasn't the same. People whispered. Eyes lingered longer than usual. A few customers quietly left large tips at Emily's tables, and the businessmen who had laughed at her earlier avoided eye contact as they rushed out, barely touching their food. Hawk stayed. He waited patiently in his booth while Emily finished her shift, saying nothing more, letting the weight of his defense settle gently behind her. When the lunch rush died down, she brought 2 mugs of fresh coffee and slid into the booth across from him. She hadn't sat with a stranger like this in years. "I don't usually talk," she began, eyes fixed on the steam rising from her cup. "And don't talk to a stranger," Hawk said softly. "Talk to someone who understands." Emily studied him. His eyes were sharp, alert, but behind them lay the same quiet ache she carried. Loss, injustice, memory. They were both walking scar tissue. So she talked, not all at once, not in perfect order, but piece by piece. She shared the story no one in that town had ever heard. She told him how she had grown up in a military family. Father a Vietnam vet, mother a nurse who worked with VA patients. Patriotism ran in her blood, but so did discipline. She enlisted at 19, did basic at Fort Leonard Wood, then qualified for advanced mechanical training. I wasn't supposed to go combat, she said, but they needed skilled wrench turners forward deployed. I volunteered. In Kandahar, her team, Iron Talon, wasn't glamorous, but they were crucial. They kept convoys running, patched bullet holes in the dark, repaired gear with whatever scraps they could find. Sometimes they'd be waist-deep in grease under a Humvee just hours after being shot at. Then she told him about the ambush. How it came fast and without warning. How she heard Perez screaming inside the overturned MRAP. How Reese shouted, "Get down!" and shielded her from flying shrapnel. How the heat from the burning truck seared her arms as she pulled out Hutchins. She paused, her eyes glossy. They said I disobeyed a lawful order, that I risked my life unnecessarily, but I couldn't. I couldn't leave them. I know, Hawk said quietly. That's not disobedience. That's leadership. She nodded, slowly. After I got back stateside, I was assigned to rear operations. Then one day, I was called in. No lawyer, just a panel. They said my behavior was reckless, that I endangered lives by not retreating. They didn't care that you saved 2 soldiers. They cared that I made them look bad, she said. A specialist showing up command with a moral compass. That doesn't go over well. What happened next? Discharge. Dishonorable. 3 months' pay and silence. She sipped her coffee. I got home to find my dad already gone. Cancer. My mom was slipping into dementia. My brother, he got into trouble. Bad crowd. I didn't have time to fight the military. I had bills. I had mouths to feed. Hawk looked at her like she was carved out of steel. You didn't give up. You adapted. You survived. That's more than most. She didn't respond. He leaned forward. You ever think about telling your story? She gave a short, bitter laugh. To who? Some news anchor who thinks I'm lying? The VA, who won't even cover half my therapy. No one listens to broken soldiers. Hawk shook his head. You're not broken. You're buried. And it's time to dig the truth out. Emily met his eyes. Why do you care? He paused, then said with quiet certainty, because if someone like you could disappear so easily, then we're all one bad day away from being forgotten. You fought for others. Let someone fight for you now. She didn't speak again, but she didn't stop him when he pulled out a notepad, either. That was the moment it began, the uncovering. The next morning, Hawk was back in the diner before the sun fully rose. He ordered black coffee and eggs over easy, but his focus was elsewhere, eyes scanning the screen of a battle-worn military laptop he brought with him, its edges dented, and keys faded from years of field use. Emily had expected him not to return. Most people didn't, but there he was, sleeves rolled, coffee untouched. Surrounded by old files and printed reports, She walked over hesitantly. You don't let things go, do you? Not when they smell like injustice, he replied without looking up. What are you doing? Starting a war, he said, finally meeting her eyes with a glint. One that ends with your name cleared? Emily stared at him. Part of her wanted to walk away, bury the past deeper than it already was. But a louder part, one she hadn't heard in years, whispered, what if he's right? What if it's not too late? Hawk was already in motion. He pulled up archived deployment rosters, unit logs, casualty reports. He tracked down the last known contacts of surviving members from Iron Talon. Over the next few days, he made call after call, left messages with wives and sons, sent emails with subject lines like Urgent Iron Talon Inquiry, Red Echo Ambush. Some didn't respond, but others did. Sergeant Hutchins, one of the men Emily dragged from the wreckage, replied in minutes. She saved my damn life. I owe her everything. Tell me what to do. Specialist Perez, who hadn't spoken publicly, since the ambush, called Hawk in tears. She wasn't just brave. She was the glue. They tried to erase her. I didn't think anyone would ever ask. In less than a week, Hawk had 5 statements, 2 combat photographs, and a partial audio recording from a body cam, all confirming Emily's version of events. Meanwhile, Emily tried to keep her life normal, pouring coffee and flipping burgers while the world tilted around her. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what it would feel like to no longer carry the weight of silence. Then, one afternoon, a stranger arrived at the diner. Late 30s, Marine buzzcut, missing 2 fingers on his left hand. He approached her booth quietly and said, "You're Carter?" Emily nodded, unsure. The man stood straighter. "Ma'am, I was in Bravo team. I saw the convoy hit from the ridge. You saved those boys. I've kept that story in my chest for 10 years. Thanks to Hawk, now I can finally speak it." Before she could react, he saluted her, right in the middle of the lunch crowd. Word began to spread. A local vet group posted a photo of Emily in the diner with the caption, "This woman deserves her honor back." Then came the ripple. Veterans from across the state started tagging her photo, sharing the hashtag Justice for Iron Talon. A retired colonel even chimed in, commenting, "Saw her work firsthand in 12, smartest wrench turner I ever met." Discharge was political, not justified. The story began to crawl across social media, slowly at first, then like wildfire. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of orange and crimson, Emily sat across from Hawk. At the picnic table outside the diner, "I didn't ask for this," she murmured. "No," he said gently. "But you earned it. What if nothing changes?" Then we still stood up, and they saw us. Emily stared out at the road. For the first time in years, she felt the burn of something rising again inside her. Not anger, not grief. Hope. She turned to Hawk. "Okay," she said. "Let's finish what we started." Asterisk. It started with a single photo, a blurry snapshot taken by a local college student eating at the diner. In the picture, Emily was kneeling beside an elderly veteran in the parking lot, adjusting the man's oxygen tank straps and helping him into his car with care and precision. Her back was to the camera, but the Iron Talon tattoo on her wrist was clearly visible. And the caption read, "They mocked her for her ink. Turns out, she carried more courage than any of them ever will." #respect our vets, #justice for Iron Talon. Within 24 hours, it had over 200,000 shares. By the end of the week, major military forums, advocacy groups, and even national news pages had picked it up. Headlines like "The Mechanic Who Was Erased," "The Waitress Who Saved Her Brothers," and "Dishonored Soldier Gets a Voice Back" began circulating. TV crews reached out. Podcasters wanted interviews. Veterans from all over the country flooded the diner's phone lines and email inbox with messages of support. But Emily still refused interviews. "This isn't about fame," she told Hawk. "I don't want cameras. I want the truth." Hawk understood. So he became the face, the voice for Emily's mission. He spoke to journalists, attended rallies, and organized a public hearing at the state's Veteran Advocacy Office. With every appearance, he made one message clear. Specialist Emily Carter was punished for her bravery. "We're not asking for a parade. We're demanding her record be corrected." The movement grew. Iron Talon veterans began sharing personal stories on social media, moments in the field where Emily kept them alive with makeshift repairs and battlefield decisions that rivaled the officers. Photos emerged of her covered in dirt and oil, crouched under broken-down vehicles, with gunfire echoing in the background. These weren't glamour shots, they were proof. Soon, the hashtag Ink of Honor went viral. One post read, "If courage had a tattoo, it'd look like hers." Another, "She fixed my rig under fire. That vehicle carried me out of hell. I owe her my life." Meanwhile, pressure mounted on the Department of the Army. A formal petition was submitted to review Emily's discharge status, backed by over 100,000 signatures and testimonies from active and retired service members. And then, an unexpected ally came forward, General Raymond Foster, the same officer who once denied Emily her right to appeal. Now retired, he reached out to Hawk privately. "Reviewed her case again," Foster said over the phone. "The politics back then, the brass wanted a scapegoat. We chose her. I was wrong." Hawk didn't mince words, then help fix it. And he did. With the general's signed affidavit, the momentum became unstoppable. A congressional committee requested a reevaluation of Emily's discharge. The Army Board for Correction of Military Records reopened her case and summoned her for an official hearing. The notice came by mail, a formal envelope with the Department of Defense seal. Emily stared at it for a long time, unopened, fingers trembling. When she finally read the letter, her knees gave out. Hawk caught her before she hit the floor. "It's happening," she whispered. "They're actually listening." A week later, Emily stood outside a VA center, where reporters waited by the curb, cameras flashing. She wore simple slacks and a white blouse. No medals. No makeup. Just her. But this time, she didn't walk. Alone. Hawk was beside her. So were Hutchins, Perez, and 3 others she hadn't seen in 10 years. Men who'd once fought and nearly died with her in the dust of Kandahar. They hugged her, one by one, each whispering the same thing. "It's time." And as Emily stepped into the building, the Iron Talon tattoo caught the sunlight, a silent badge of defiance, grief, and courage. The courtroom was nothing like the battlefields Emily had known. No gunfire, no explosions, only the sterile hum of air conditioning and the faint rustle of papers. But the tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Emily sat in the alley, front row, hands folded tightly in her lap. Hawk sat beside her, silent but steady, like a rock in a storm. Behind them, a handful of veterans and family members filled the seats, faces worn by time and hardship, but eyes shining with hope. The board was composed of high-ranking officers and legal advisors. Their expressions were hard to read. A mix of skepticism, duty, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of respect. The hearing began with opening statements. The military prosecutor recited the original charges: disobedience, insubordination, reckless behavior under fire. The tone was clinical, detached, as if Emily's life was just a case number in a ledger. Then came the defense. Hawk spoke first, his voice low but powerful. Specialist Emily Carter's actions saved lives that day. Her decision to disobey orders was born not out of defiance, but out of necessity, a soldier's oath to never leave a comrade behind. We have testimonies from multiple witnesses, physical evidence, and battle reports that support her bravery and sacrifice. One by one, veterans took the stand, recounting stories of Emily's grit and courage. How she patched vehicles in blazing heat, how she ran through gunfire to pull trapped men to safety, how she kept spirits alive even when hope seemed lost. Then came the pivotal moment, the presentation of the original after-action report, heavily redacted and biased. The defense team exposed inconsistencies, political pressure, and a cover-up aimed at protecting the reputations of higher command. Emily remained quiet throughout, the weight of every word pressing down on her chest. When it was her turn to speak, she stood slowly. Looking the board in the eyes, she said, "I never wanted glory. I only wanted to do my job and come home alive. I disobeyed orders because those orders would have meant death for my brothers. I accept responsibility for my actions. But I ask you to see them for what they were, acts of courage and loyalty." A hush fell over the room. The board retired to deliberate, leaving Emily and Hawk alone with the spectators. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the chairman returned, holding a sealed envelope. He cleared his throat. After a thorough review of all evidence, testimonies, and circumstances, the board has reached a unanimous decision. Emily's heart pounded. The discharge of Specialist Emily Carter is hereby overturned. Her record shall be amended to reflect an honorable discharge. Furthermore, we recommend the posthumous awarding of the Bronze Star Medal for Valor for her actions during the Red Echo ambush. A collective breath seemed to release from the room. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. Hawk stood and clapped slowly. Daniel Reese's mother, seated nearby, reached over and took Emily's hand. Squeezing it gently, the words felt surreal. After years of silence and shame, Emily Carter was no longer a forgotten soldier. Outside, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and veterans cheered quietly. But Emily's gaze was distant, reflecting on battles fought long before this day. When the ceremony was held weeks later, Emily stood in her newly issued uniform, a crisp olive green that fit like a second skin. The bronze star pinned to her chest gleamed under the spotlight. She looked out at the crowd, faces old and young, family and strangers, fellow warriors. And in that moment, the girl who once wore an apron and hid behind a waitress smile became a symbol, not just of survival, but of justice. The Iron Talon unit, once erased from records, was finally remembered, and Emily was home. Asterisk, the diner had never looked the same. Emily Carter stood behind the counter, the familiar scent of brewing, coffee and frying bacon surrounding her like an old friend. But now, there was something different in the air, a quiet reverence, a newfound respect that rippled through every corner of Joe's Highway Diner. A polished plaque hung prominently on the wall near the register, engraved with the names of the Iron Talon unit members lost in the war, including Sergeant Daniel Reese. Beneath it, a framed photo showed Emily and Hawk standing side by side at the medal ceremony, faces proud and unyielding. Customers often paused to read the plaque, their conversations hushed. Veterans stopped in from towns miles away just to shake her hand and share their own stories. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, pointing at the tattoo inked on her wrist, now no longer a mark of ridicule, but a symbol of bravery. Emily's days were still filled with long shifts and endless orders. But something had changed inside her. The weight of silence had lifted, replaced by the steady pulse of purpose. She found herself mentoring young veterans who walked through the diner's doors, those struggling with wounds seen and unseen, lost between two worlds. She listened to their stories, shared hers, and offered them the kind of understanding she had once desperately needed. Hawk came every Sunday, his prosthetic leg tapping rhythmically on the diner floor as he greeted everyone like family. Over coffee, they shared quiet moments and laughter, reminding each other that even in a world marked by loss, companionship and healing could flourish. One afternoon, as Emily wiped down the counter, a group of teenagers entered, curious and wide-eyed. "Is it true you are a soldier?" one of them asked, nervously glancing at the tattoo. Emily smiled, holding out her wrist. "More than that," she said softly. "I was part of a unit called Iron Talon. We didn't leave anyone behind, and neither should you." The teens nodded. their respect genuine and heartfelt. That night, as the diner closed and the last customers trickled out, Emily stood by the window, staring at her reflection. The tattoo stared back, no longer a secret, no longer a source of shame. It was a story inked in courage, sacrifice, and redemption. Her journey had come full circle, from the shadows of ridicule to the light of honor, from a silent waitress to a remembered hero. And as she turned off the lights and locked the door behind her, Emily knew one thing for sure. Heroes aren't just born on battlefields. Sometimes they're forged in the quiet moments, in the lives they touch, and in the stories they refuse to let die. Because bravery isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the strength to stand tall, even when no one's watching. And sometimes it's the courage to carry your scars with pride. Emily Carter was all of that. And now the world finally saw her.